Be here on an evening, you can tune in to our normal website, and you can find it there. And I think they'll also be archived on there,
Yes.
something like that. So if you miss one and you want to hear it, you're very welcome. We're going to do something a little different in this time, and part of what has occasioned this is I realized I was just missing the opportunity to be with people and just other than in a preaching setting, and to have a little worship time and do some things that perhaps speak to a little different culture than the one that we embrace in our morning services. So we're going to sing every week for just a couple songs. And the words will be on the screen. You may not even need the screen, but if you do and you can't read them, I apologize, and we'll get them bigger next week. But we're doing this in a way that is kind of like where I can do it all from the piano and both keyboards. So we'll go from there. So I'd invite you to stand and join me in a little song here.
So basically, whatever's on the screen is going to be on that.
Some glad morning when this life is over, I'll fly away to a home on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. When the shadows of this life have gone, I'll fly away. Like a bird from this mars has flown, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. Like a God, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away to a land where joy shall never end. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. That's not too bad. Let's try an older one too. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how sweet to walk in this pilgrim way, leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how bright the path grows from day to day, leaning on the everlasting arms. And secure from all alarms, lean on the everlasting everlasting arms. Now, because we're doing this a little different tonight, I'm going to invite you, as we sing the chorus, to lean a little bit, okay? You can lean to the left or to the right, because we're going to be talking about that divide tonight. If you want to lean to the forward, you can. If you want to lean back, you can. Let's see how people lean, okay? Leaning, say thanks to you from all along. Leaning on the everlasting arms. All right, so there's an old song that fits the theme tonight. We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. And we pray that our unity may one day be restored. And they'll know we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. We will walk with each other. We will walk hand in hand. We will walk with each other. We will walk hand in hand. And together we'll spread the news that God is in our land. And they'll know we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. We will work with each other. We will work side by side. We will work with each other. We will work side by side. And we'll guard each one's dignity and save each one's pride. And they'll know we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. So how many of you went back to MYF for a minute there? Yeah. One more song tonight. Thou art worthy. How many of you know this song? How many of you are going to know this song? Goes like this. Thou art worthy, thou art worthy, thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory, glory and honor, glory and honor and power. For thou hast created, hast all things created. For thou hast created all things. And for thy pleasure created. We are created for thou worthy, O Lord. Amen. Let's have a seat. Go from there. And we'll begin with the word of prayer tonight. Father, we have come into your house, and we couldn't be here without stopping to tell you how grateful we are that you have come into our lives. You are worthy, Lord, to receive all honor and glory and power. You have created us for yourself. You have made our hearts for you, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. So come now, if you would, and be with us in this time. Let us be mindful of the Spirit of Christ, that as we talk, we may hear a little bit of your voice as well. We ask this in your name, Lord Jesus. Amen. Okay, so we want to welcome everybody. This is the first of what we hope can be kind of an ongoing series of informal times. We're calling it Tuesdays at the Well. Let me see if I can get this right. Yeah, we wanted to call it Wednesdays at the Well because it sounds better to me. It kind of alliterates better. But as it turns out, Tuesdays are an actually better night. Now, for some, what may come to mind when we say that perhaps is the name of Mitch Albom's lovely book, which was Tuesdays with Morrie. They made a nice movie out of it. And there were a lot of great notions in that book. One of my favorite quotes that comes from it is, "I like myself better when I'm with you." And that's a wonderful notion, isn't it? That's true. But somehow, Tuesdays with Temple doesn't have the same kind of cachet to it. So we're going with Tuesdays at the Well. And that's appropriate because if you read the weekly word in the Bulletin Sunday, you were hopefully reminded of the significance of the well in the life of villages in the times of the Bibles. It was a critically important place in a land where the availability of water could never be taken for granted. So the best source for water was always a natural spring, of course, but where those were not available, and where underground water was at a reachable depth, wells became this sort of natural, spring of life for many people. It linked people to a liquid on which life depended. So wells became a symbol of hope and of blessing and of home. But wells were also significant meeting places. For Isaac and for Jacob and for Moses, it was a meeting at a well, for instance, which proved to be the first step in the direction of marriage and a step out of what had been difficult circumstances. Genesis 24, 29, Exodus 2 tell us that. Jacob first met Rachel at a well near Haran, and he was so struck by her that he used the oldest opening line in the world, namely, "Would you like for me to roll the stone away from the mouth of the well and water your dad's sheep?" How many of you have actually used that line? Because, it's great. It only works in certain contexts, but it worked for Jacob, certainly. She said yes, he kissed her, and that was the beginning of their whole love story. It's in Genesis 29, if you're interested. Later on, Genesis 33 tells us that Jacob came to the city of Shechem, also called Sychar. That's up in Canaan, and he bought a piece of land there for 100 pieces of silver. He set up an altar. He called it Elohai Israel. It means either El is the God of Israel, or it means mighty is the God of Israel. He lived there for a long time, which meant that he had to dig a well himself. which he did, and that same well has now stood for 2,000 years. You can still go there today if you like, if the politics of getting in and out of the West Bank favor you, and it's this town called actually Nablus now. You can even go down into the basement of the Church of St. Photina. That's a Greek Orthodox church in Nablus. And then when you go down into the basement, and Photina is the traditional name given to the Samaritan woman who met Jesus there. In Russian, it's actually Svetlana. Well, there's built over the well this little area, and you can draw water from it, provided you give the monks just a little bit of love as you go there. So I have a little bottle of water from Jacob's well, and you know, let me tell you, it's no different from Buffalo Bayou, but it's nicely sealed, and it has Jacob's well on it, so it must be authentic. It came from that church there. So in that spirit, what we want to do is have some conversations about things that matter, and we've chosen some tough topics to discuss with your help. Actually, we chose these. So what we're going to do is talk about these for the next 5 weeks. Then we'll take a break during and then come back during the Lenten season in March and do a more focused Bible study for 5 weeks. Okay, so what we want to talk a bit about tonight is the topic of us versus them. What psychologists refer to as othering sometimes. Othering is viewing people as part of an in-group or an out-group. But I want to begin by asking a more basic question. How many of you think that there is something wrong in American society today? Okay, so we're agreed on that. Okay, good. Do we seem more divided and conflicted than we've ever been as a people? Yeah. So are we as healthy of a people as we once were? Something's clearly off. Senator Ben Sasse from Nebraska, one of the best thinkers in public life today, has written a new book entitled Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal. It's not about politics. It's not about government. He prior to becoming a senator, was the youngest college president in America. He has his degree from Oxford. He has a PhD. I mean, he's a very bright man. And in that book, he has some rather alarming statistics, beginning with the fact that despite all the amazing medical advances and the leaps in our technology, the lifespan in America is in decline for the third year in a row. This is the first time there has been a 2-year drop in lifespan since 1962. And the cause then was a severe influenza epidemic that just swept over the whole country. 2016 data suggests 3 causes for why the lifespan's lower. Alzheimer's is the first one. Suicides is the second one. And unintentional injuries, including drug and alcohol overdoses, is the third one. I find this kind of startling. In 2016, the last year that we have all the data on, 63,630 people died of overdoses. That is more than the number of Americans killed in the 20-year Vietnam War. That is twice the number killed in automobile accidents, which used to be the leading cause of death in this country. There were 45,000 suicides. That's a 30-year high. And it runs across the board. All ages, all ethnicities, all status in life, rich, poor, doesn't matter. This rate of suicide is an alarming one. We are killing ourselves both on purpose and accidentally. Because These aren't deaths from poverty or from war or from famine. We're literally dying of despair in this country. We also ought to know that discontent in the political system's nothing new. But there is a vitriol today that I think is out of control. And it affects all of us. For example, how many of you might have a visceral reaction when you see these faces? It doesn't matter which side you're on. One of these people is probably irritating you right now. And you just as soon not see their picture for even 5 more seconds. Half of all American adults primarily learn about the world from cable news outlets. Half. A very small minority still read newspapers. I used to be one of those until the Chronicle circulation department so messed up our subscription. After 45 years, I just canceled it. I couldn't get them to stop throwing it, even when I'm on vacation. They threw it every day. So some people get it from Twitter, and some people, I think 3 people still, listen to NPR. Mostly because it's so soothing, and they have the dulcet voices on that channel, and it just sort of makes you all happy inside listening to them. There's a very stark difference, though, in how the news is presented, say, between Fox News and CNN. They've done some studies on what are the words used in conjunction with other words. And there's a remarkable variance between cable networks. For example, the word gun, when that word is used in a study or in a story, on MSNBC, the words most often with it are the words premature, debate, stocks, and control. On CNN, the words most often with the word gun, modifications, reignites, pellet, control, and loophole. And on Fox News, the words are control, debate, Vegas, tragedy, NRA. It's not simply that we're getting different opinions. We get different facts sometimes, depending upon who we listen to. And most of us tend to have our comfort zone that we go to that particular outlet. That's who we listen to. It becomes an echo chamber that reinforces what our beliefs are. And the problem is the assumptions that we begin to embrace are not just that folks on the other side of any issue are wrong or even incompetent. It's that they're evil. We think people who are on the other side of the question from us are evil. And so the result is we have largely divided into tribes in this country. Red states, blue states, CNN, Fox, Trump, never Trump. People fall into categories. And trust has been eroded in every institution which we have. The government, the press, the schools, the church. But even in mankind, in 1974, 77% of people in America agreed that most people could be trusted. Most people are trustworthy. Today, that number is 30%. Only 30% of people today think most people can be trusted. If you ask, can you trust the government? It's in the low teens. Now, it's perhaps precisely because we can do so little actually about these things, about these larger things, that we have turned instead on each other. In urban combat training, there's a well-documented tendency that people will shift their focus from a distant but important target to a less important but closer target. Because we just want to knock down all the easy stuff, right? And so in this respect, the problems in our culture are so great that we attack each other instead of attacking some of those problems. To quote Tuesdays with Maury, people are only mean when they're threatened. So apparently everybody feels threatened in some way. So when we begin to view other people who may not be just like us in particular, who are not our quote, our kind, with a host of negative feelings, it's not just prejudice, it is distrust and disgust that we begin to see people. Now, in part, we are wired this way biologically. Our brains balance out two primordial systems. The amygdala region of the brain, somewhere there, that generates fear and distrust of things that pose a potential danger. Predators, getting lost, whatever it may be. If we're in those situations, that's the part of our brain that sort of takes over and tells us that is the robot on Lost in Space. Danger, Will Robinson, danger. Okay. The other region, a group of structures that are connected called the mesolimbic system, is what gives rise to pleasure and feeling of reward in response to things that make it more likely that we're not just going to survive, but we're going to thrive and flourish. You think about things like food, social pleasure, including trust. That's what this part of the brain sort of takes over. So the question is how these two systems interact largely determines how we treat other people. It explains, at least biologically, the human instinct to distrust other people sometimes. Now, I want to suggest to you, though, that this distrust is not a new phenomenon. In the days of Jesus, there was a similarly great divide between Jews and Samaritans. Now, there were historical reasons for that. It dated back to the destruction of Israel in 722 BC. When the Assyrians, who conquered Israel, moved the Jews out of what had already become known as the northern kingdom of Samaria, Samaria being also known as Israel in the north, Judah in the south, when the kingdom split. When they moved people out of Samaria, they moved other people in. This was their method of conquest. Get everybody disrupted. Put people from over here, put people from over here. Keep everybody in an unfamiliar place, so the prospects of their rebellion go way down. They're just trying to survive. Who did they move in? Well, it depends on who you ask. Some say the Samaritans, the people that became known as Samaritans, were the descendants of the tribes of Joseph. That would be Manasseh and Ephraim, that had kind of been lost over into one side. Some say, no, the people that they moved in were people from Babylon and Cuth and places far to the east who were thoroughgoing pagans. In either case, the Samaritans, who saw themselves, and they would say the word comes from the word shamarin, which means a keeper or a guardian. They saw themselves as the keepers or the guardians of the Torah, of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They didn't accept any text beyond that. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that's it. Okay. So they fiercely rejected Jerusalem as the capital or the religious center of the country. They preferred to build an altar on Mount Gerizim, which, according to their tradition, was not only where Abram had met God and built an altar, it says that, Genesis, but was also the first place in the Promised Land where Joshua and the Israelites came when they entered into Canaan. And they came there and they read the law and reestablished the whole covenant of Moses. Joshua 8:30 tells us that actually Joshua stood Yeah. Joshua stood on Mount Ebal, and it's not very far. Some of us have been there. You can see, if you're in the middle, it's just, you can see both hills. Half the people were on Ebal, half the people were on, actually, Gerizim. And there, he sort of read the covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant was in the middle, in between those two. So they say this is where God was at work. But all of that history was lost after 722 BC, when first the Assyrians and then the Babylonians came roughly moving in, conquered first Israel in the north, or Samaria, and then the Babylonians conquered Judah and Jerusalem in the south. They moved folks hither and thither. So the enmity between Jews and Samaritans became so great because the Samaritans thought, you guys have gone way further than you should have. And the Jews thought, what is wrong with you? There are things that happened after Deuteronomy, okay? Joshua, Judges, I mean, all of that, you know. And this became such a great enmity that they didn't talk to each other. They wouldn't eat after each other. They would never share a utensil. And Jews would go out of their way not to go through Samaria. Now there's a little problem, because Galilee in the north and Jerusalem in the south, what lies between them? Samaria, okay? So if you're going from south to north, you've got to go through Samaria. But you don't really have to. If you want to go all the way around it, you can do that. And that's what most Jews did. This sort of enmity shows up, though, in two places, doesn't it? Does anybody remember where? One of them is a really well-known story. The parable of the Good Samaritan, yes. Okay, it's in Luke 10. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. This is the wilderness road. Some of us have been there, and the wilderness looks like the moon. It's just ridiculous. And Jesus tells this story of a man going down, and he's going down because Jerusalem's high, and whenever you leave Jerusalem, you're going down. Whenever you go to Jerusalem, you are going up. And so he's going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. That's only about 17, 18 miles, but it's all through this wilderness. It's very bad lands. Nobody lives there. You can barely get enough grazing sometimes to put sheep there. Just by the way, the setting for the 23rd Psalm. So if you have in mind that nice, wonderful English pasture with sheep grazing gently and sweetly, and that's not it. This is where he's talking about. So imagine saying in this place, "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall want nothing." What? You want everything if you're there, okay? You have nothing if you're there, okay? But he's going down there, and he's attacked by robbers, and then what happens? You remember the story? Two people come by. Who's the first one? It's a priest. Yeah, it's the preacher. Goes right, and it says he passed on the other side of him. Well, I mean, Kate's been there, so's Oliver, Julie and I. You can't pass on the other side of the road. The road's only this wide, okay? So to go on the other side of him, you have to step over him, okay? That's a very generous reading of it. He passed on the other side, as though he didn't see him over there. Who's the second guy that comes? A Levite. What's a Levite? Associate pastor. Yeah, kinda. He's actually more like the choir director. Okay. So the preacher goes by, the choir director goes by, the choir director passes by on the other side too. Neither one of them stops to help this guy. And this is a Jewish guy, right? I mean, he's come from Jerusalem. He's going to Jericho. And he's gotten waylaid somehow. And then who's the third guy that comes? A Samaritan. Okay? And what does the Samaritan do? he helps them. He fixes them up. He puts them on his beast of burden, donkey probably. He walks and lets the guy ride. He takes him down to the nearest Kandokian, which is the nearest Holiday Inn. It's a little place, really. And he says, take care of him. Here's money. If you need more, I'll pay you on the next trip through. And what's the whole point of the story? Jesus tells it to ask the guy, so who is your neighbor? And why does he have to tell the story in the first place? Because a lawyer has tried to pull a fast one on Jesus and said, who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells this story and then says, so, Mr. Attorney, who do you think was a neighbor to this man? And the surprise of the whole thing is what? It's a Samaritan. It's a Samaritan. I was in a meeting about 2 months ago of one of our general boards and agencies that is doing some work, and they cited this story in some materials, and they had it completely backwards. They said there was a Samaritan guy going down, and a nice Jew stopped and helped him. And I raised my hand in the meeting, and I said, I think you have that backwards. And they stopped and said, what? And I said, no, that's not the story. It's completely backwards. And I thought to myself, you haven't just, and these are all seminary graduates, And I said, you haven't failed seminary, you failed Bible school, okay? How did you not get this? Okay? But, that's the whole point of the story, right? That's the shock of the story, that a Samaritan is the one who helps the Jew. The other place where the Samaritans show up, though, is in John chapter 4, which brings us back to Jacob's well. Not this one, but the first one. Let's look at that passage more carefully. If you got a Bible, pull it out in John chapter 4. I want you to notice the first verse of this. Chapter 4, verse 4. Now he, Jesus, he had to go through Samaria. But he didn't have to go through Samaria. Because again, if you were an observant Jew, you would avoid Samaria at all costs. You would go all the way over to Jericho, then you would cross over the Jordan River, then you'd go up the King's Highway on the eastern side of the Jordan River and go up that way, then you'd come back over west onto Galilee. You didn't have to go through Samaria, it just made it much harder. So what does this mean that he had to go through Samaria? Why did Jesus have to go through it?
He was pressed for time?
Well, yeah. I think there's two reasons. Yeah, I think there's two reasons. There was a conversation which needed to take place there. Okay? And Jesus was ever mindful of that. We'll come back to that one. The second reason is Jesus went back to where the whole plan of salvation began. If you look over at Genesis chapter 12 for just a moment, you will see there is the call of Abram. Okay? It becomes known as Abraham. And he started back in Ur of the Chaldeans. That is what is now, it's Iraq, down by the Euphrates River as it's going into the Persian Gulf. This is where Abram and his family lived, in this area, and God told them to go to Canaan over here. So what does Genesis 12 tell us that they did? Well, they went about halfway. They went to Haran, up there. And it was so lovely. You thought, well, why do we need to go all the way to Canaan? Let's just stop here. They stopped and they got comfortable in Haran. Abram and his father Terah and his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot. So the Lord reissued his call. Let me be a little clearer on this. get up and go to Canaan. That's the promised land, not Haran. So they went. Abram was already, by the way, 75 years old. 75 years old. That meant he was eligible for all the AARP discounts on the way. Okay? Maybe that's why he waited so long, so he can get that $10 off at the Holiday Inn. Genesis 12:6 says, Abram traveled through the land as far as the great tree of Moreh at Shechem, Sychar, Nablus, whatever name you want to give it. And there he built an altar before he went on to the hills east of Bethel. Shechem was exactly where later on Jacob would build his well, when it became known as Sychar in Samaria. In other words, Jesus went specifically to where the whole story of the Hebrew people began in order to have this conversation with a woman whom most Jews would have said was only a half-Jew at best. Okay? She's just a Samaritan. Now that was fairly noticeable by everybody. Okay? Let's go back to John chapter 4. Jesus went to where Jacob's well was, it says, and tired from the journey. Let me see if I can go back a minute. Yeah. Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about noon. And then a Samaritan woman came to draw water. Now, we could stop right there and say, well, what is she going in the dead heat of the day for? Why doesn't she go in the morning? Well, because everybody else goes in the morning. All the other women in town go in the morning. She does not want to be with the other women in town. Why not? Because she slept with 5 of their husbands. She has had 5 husbands. The one she's with now isn't her husband at all. In other words, this is not model citizen of the year in Sychar. She goes to the well at noon because nobody else is there at noon. It's too hot. She goes there so she can be by herself and can get her water. But Jesus is there. The disciples have already gone into town. And they've gone into town to buy some food, we're told. And so Jesus looks at her and asks for a drink of water. And what is the response of the woman in verse 9? What does she say? Say what? What are you talking about? You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan, and a Samaritan woman at that. Men don't even talk to women. And Jews don't talk to Samaritans. And here you are, a Jewish man talking to me, a Samaritan woman. Are you crazy? When we lived up in East Texas, we had, in the town we lived in Glendale, was a town with us and Pentecostals and 12 Baptist churches. And the mayor of town was a Baptist, and the city council were all Baptists, and the school superintendent was a Baptist, and the school members were all Baptists. And they hired a new football coach one day. He was a Baptist who had come from Corsicana area. And one day he shows up at the Methodist church. And I thought, oh, that's nice. He's just going around to all the churches to kind of do that. At the end of the service, he came up and said he wanted to join. I said, are you out of your freaking mind? You can't join here. He said, why not? I said, because you're a Baptist, and this is a Baptist town, and I hired you as a Baptist coach. And if you join the Methodist church, they'll kill you. He said, no, I want to join here. He joined. I was not home from church 30 minutes before the Baptist preacher was on the phone. What are you doing, stealing my member? I said, he just showed up. I didn't ask him to come. Well, he lasted 1 year as the coach of that town. He's a pretty good coach, but he went against all the powers that be. The Samaritan woman is so startled, Jesus even talks to her. And the parentheses tells you in verse 9, doesn't it? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. But Jesus did, and what's more, he began a whole conversation with her, which not only drew her in like he was drawing water from the well, but which made it clear that the kind of us-them division, which had existed for centuries between Jews and Samaritans, was no longer valid. The woman tried to steer the conversation into a theological debate about where the proper place to worship was. Jesus replied, he didn't care. It didn't bother him where you worship, as long as you worship God in spirit and in truth. What does all this have to say to the present divide in our culture? I would suggest that we're not as bad as the Jews and Samaritans. Nobody I know drives all the way around Georgia to get from New York to Florida. So if this divide can be bridged, our divide can be bridged too, can't it? So let's figure that out. At your tables, I want you to take just a few minutes and have a little conversation. And I want you to begin with the question, what do you think divides people the most in our culture today? What do you think divides people the most? Okay? Take a few minutes and just figure that out.
Sometimes they're one way because their whole family was, and they, just assume that they are directly. Sometimes they even know why. That's what their family was. In relationships, money, or racial, baptism, but politics has become very so I mean,
which is kind of natural coming into it.
And I don't remember.
So when our football team doesn't win, you gotta watch something. That's a good question.
Okay, the second question for you. The second question for you is, can you think of something of which you were once absolutely certain that you now believe you were absolutely wrong about? Something that you were once absolutely certain of that you now think I was absolutely wrong about?
You were absolutely certain about something, now you realize you're absolutely wrong. No, it's not. I just heard it. I just heard it. Well, it's late. It's very late.
What we were sure of, you know,
Okay, so lots of sharing to do still, I bet. But I'm going to invite you to hold it for a few minutes, and then if you want to carry on this conversation afterwards, you're more than welcome to. I'm going to suggest part of the answer for this is to accept the idea that we don't know everything, and it's possible, just possible, that we might be wrong about something. Okay? So to move us past us versus them, I want to give you 5 ideas. The first one is that we take responsibility for what we can control. Okay? For example, if it's hot outside, you can't control the weather. Okay? If it's cold outside, you can't control the weather. What you can do is to put an air conditioner or a heater in your house. Okay? You can do something. You just can't control the bigger mega systems. But you have to take responsibility for what you can do, okay? Whatever that might be. The second suggestion I have for this is that we ditch the drama, okay? That means we make a concerted effort to lower the temperature, to turn down the volume, to short-circuit the cycle that takes everything immediately to DEFCON 5. Okay, this is the most important. No, it's not. Angie, our daughter, had a professor at Rice. He said that one day he was sitting at home and he taught Hebrew and German and theology, and he was reading something in a scholarly paper. And he said, his wife was sitting there. He said, "This is so interesting," and she looked up and she said, "No, it's not." And that's the truth sometimes. What we think is so critical really isn't, okay? So lower the volume on it just a little bit and to go from there. Third, skip the stereotypes. Author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, an African, has eloquently stated, quote, "The problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story." In other words, stereotypes reduce those not exactly like us to only their differences. So one of the things we have to do is just to refuse to indulge stereotypes as real people. Fourth notion, Robert McBurnett, one of our members, has written this on his blog. Entertaining this notion: others don't have to be wrong for you to be right. Okay? It's possible that you can have this kind of tension if you're willing to sort of let other people have their views too sometimes. And then the fifth thing is to turn us versus them into we. The story is told of Abraham Lincoln, who, as the Civil War was coming to a close, was meeting with several leaders of the country, trying to think through what should come next. Lincoln was advocating for a reconciliation that would be relatively generous to the southern states, to those that had been a part of that. And one of the northern senators, Thaddeus Stevens from Massachusetts, banged his hand on the table and he yelled, "Mr. Lincoln, we must destroy our enemies." And Lincoln replied calmly, "Mr. Stevens, do I not destroy my enemy when I make him my friend?" I think there's a profundity in that, okay? That if we don't let us versus them ever find a resting place in us, if we look for the we rather than the us versus them, things will begin to sort of change how we handle this. We have just a minute or so left. Anybody have any other thoughts or comments that you want to share? Does anyone want to tell me, stand up and say, "You're completely wrong"? If you do, that's fine. We'll just try to make you into my friend. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this topic? Okay. Next week, we're going to talk about dealing with our doubts. And what do you do when you're just not sure, which is pretty much everybody, okay? January 29th, we're going to tackle immigration. And what is the biblical perspective on that? And what do we do with the passages about sojourners? And how should we handle this crisis? February 5th, we're going to talk about how we should think about the Bible, because really that is kind of pivotal, isn't it? I mean, can we really draw our ethic from it? Should we read it a different way? We'll talk about that. And then on the last session for this series, February 12th, we're going to wait and see where we are. There's several questions that I think need addressing. Loneliness is one of them. What do we do with that? That is epidemic in this country. And until we find a solution for that, I think loneliness is actually killing us. Lonely people are 25% more likely to die prematurely than those who are not. And the percentage of Americans who report they have no one to talk through things that matter tripled from the 1980s to the 2000s. 25% of the population says there's nobody in their life for that. So I think that's worth talking about at some point. Addiction is another thing worth talking about, because that impacts every family in this church and every family in this community. It may be addiction to various things, but it's out there. And then at some point, and I'm not even sure when, I think we'll want to talk about what is a Christian view of sexuality, and what do we do living in an overly sexualized culture. How do we pull back to something that sort of speaks more to God's design for us as men and as women, and as his children. If you have another topic that you think, I just wish we talked about this, just email me and we'll get it on the list. Again, what we're going to do is these 5 weeks, take a few weeks off. Some of us are going to go off and fight general conference battles and then come back. And then during Lent, we're doing a very special series on how the wilderness is impactful for our faith. And then we'll come back after that for the next 5 tough topics. Okay? Let's close in prayer. So, Father, we are so very grateful that in the ultimate us versus them, you bridged the gap, and we were completely undeserving of it. We were irascible. We were irredeemable. We were deplorable. And you came and you brought us back to yourself anyway. So, Father, can we have that in our minds as we do with other people? And will you help us this day to short circuit some of the bitterness that has engulfed your world? We ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate it. They can still serve you coffee if you want something.